Hello and welcome to another episode of Roster Reconstruction. I'm your host, Corban Ford, and I am joined with my good friends, co-hosts of the show, Garrett Bugay and Josh Earl. We're in the building, and we are also on a new platform now. We have our feed, of course, but also now Roster Reconstruction is going to be running on the Switch Theory podcast network. So definitely make sure to check that out. That is in the works. It's going to be a lot of fun. But this show, with all of its Roster Reconstruction philosophical conversation, will be joining that. So definitely excited for that. But before we even get started with that, Josh, Garrett, how are y'all doing today or tonight?
Doing well, my friend.
Yeah, having a good weekend so far. I started up Blue Eye Samurai on Netflix. That's a real fun R-rated animation. That's pretty darn good. I'm a couple episodes in. I'm already hooked.
I think that's cool. And that's on Netflix?
Yeah.
I have to check that out. Blue Eye Samurai. Definitely a nice little, I could use that in a rap or something. That's definitely a nice little rhyme. Okay, cool. Yeah, I watched the Lakers lose to Orlando, so that was great this weekend. Just not really sure how I feel about the Lakers this year. Like them, definitely they need some time to gel. Injuries are a thing, but they are so dependent on LeBron. And this will be a deeper team. Like, even with the injuries they've had, I get it. You know, Rui Hachimura is a good boost off the bench, and he's been playing inconsistent this season, you know, even before he got injured with that eye contusion / concussion, possibly. And then Taurean Prince is injured and Gabe Vincent, and I get it. But you still have Austin Reeves, I thought was going to take a big step. That hasn't happened yet. D'Angelo Russell is a solid offensive player. That's not really been it's feast or famine with him. And then Anthony Davis, who's like numbers look good, but kind of been inconsistent. I don't know. I just have weird signs. Like, they're 3-3, but I have more concerns about them than I probably should. But that's my weekend. Josh, how was yours? How's yours fun?
Yeah, very sleep deprived. And my e-bike tire flattened out on me, and I had to walk it all the way home from a park that's like 2 miles from us. So that wasn't the most fun, but you know, I also get to play around with my soon-to-be 1-year-old daughter all day, so I can't really complain too much.
Well, that is great. Congratulations on almost 1 year old.
Mm-hmm.
Your daughter. I am, exciting, I'm sure.
Can't wait. And horrifying.
And horrifying. Listen, it's so much more time for her to learn about the greatness of Monte Ellis, Michael Beasley, Terry Rozier. It's going to be great. But today, we are starting our first kind of, we've done several here on Roster Reconstruction, philosophical, general conversations. College basketball season starts next week, or as you're listening to this week. But what just passed was the 2024-2025 rookie scale option decisions for several NBA, not rookies, but the class of, I think it was 2021.
Yeah.
There we go. Yes. And so a few of those players did not, like a decent amount of them did not get their options picked up. And among those were two guys from the Hornets, one James Bouknight, the other Kai Jones, who I'm sure you heard about the news recently just being waived, Keon Johnson of the Suns, Usman Garuba of the Thunder, Josh Christopher of the Grizzlies, and Ty Washington of the Thunder. Don't know why I didn't put Ty and Usman together. But Bouknight was the only player who was retained by his team while they declined that 2024-2025 rookie scale option. And we kind of wanted to use that, not even really specifically to dive into the 2021 class, although I'm sure there'll be some conversation there. But just the three of us thought it was interesting, like, why you do have a high draft picks that do not, get retained by their team. Are there common through lines in terms of scouting or evaluation? Is it a lot of a team fit? Is it a player not stepping up to the role they're given? Several different scenarios there. And we just wanted to kind of flesh that out and use the 2021 draft class like the inspiration for this conversation. So definitely want to kick it off to Josh first, kind of bounce around, kind of go from there. But I mean, what are your thoughts in general for players, drafted relatively high that not even don't pan out, but don't even make it, past their initial, rookie scale contract? And I know you did a lot of research in anticipation of this, Josh. So I kind of want to let you go from there.
Yeah. So I looked at relatively recent, so the last 15, 20 years or so, like first rounders and more specifically lotto guys who either had their third year option declined or their fourth year option declined. And what was interesting is since 2005, there have been 14 lottery players who had either their third-year option or their fourth-year option declined. So basically, the teams that either drafted them or traded for them after they were drafted decided to cut bait on relatively inexpensive young players who had previously been held to high standards by winding up in the NBA lottery. And there's a lot of interesting names and a lot of interesting, reasons behind things. Also, you see a lot of Phoenix Suns draftees, which we'll dive into in a little bit. But 2021 was an interesting kind of kicking off thing because you had two lotto guys who were one was waived, Josh Primo, which we all know why. We're not really going to get into that. And then James Bouknight had his fourth-year option declined by the Hornets. And I think there's a lot of different reasons why things don't work out for players in these situations. And I think we could start off by talking about the Hornets and Bouknight and Kai Jones and even somewhat tangentially Mark Williams, in terms of like sometimes it's not the most conducive environment for development. And with the Hornets, we've seen that Bouknight, Kai Jones, and even most of his rookie year, Mark Williams, they weren't giving them a whole lot of minutes. They weren't giving them particular opportunities. And it's not like the Hornets were a particularly good team the last few seasons either. So let's touch on that a little bit. Garrett, what do you think about how important an environment and like the emphasis on development that a team brings to this situation, how that can impact the player's career?
Well, I mean, it's everything. I mean, we're seeing someone like another player in the 2021 class, Cade Cunningham, this year in Detroit, struggle a lot with turnovers in particular, in part because that team just has no spacing. The context and the environment that he's in just doesn't really help him at all. And then, beyond that, it's I think something we should mention as well, even though this is not really the point of this episode, but the recent changes in the CBA also upped the salaries of these rookie contracts. So someone like James Bouknight, who again had his fourth-year option declined, he was set to make about $6 million, I think, on that option, and the Hornets can decline that and presumably still bring him back for less than that. So that's something that also, is a factor, especially with more recent situations where this has come into play, where teams can say, well, this guy's about to make $10 million. He's not going to get that on the open market, so we might as well decline it. And we're not really risking losing him too much either if we're willing to offer him some of that back.
No, I definitely think there's obviously a financial component to that. I mean, we see it through most. I mean, like, okay, I am making the case here, even though we know it's not likely to happen. But James Bouknight is still retained by his team, right? Now, is that like a sign of like, okay, he's been battling injuries? Because that's been a thing. It's also unrealized potential, especially for someone drafted as high as he's been. But, you could make the argument, hey, no one else is really, like you said, Garrett, no one's really going to be like knocking on the door to really, give an arm and a leg to really force us out of our comfort zone financially. We can sit tight. No, we're not going to, make a long-term commitment. We haven't either seen, for whatever reason, the type of progress or production that we were hoping for, given where you were drafted. But it may not necessarily mean, okay, yeah, we're cutting ties with you. Like we saw with those other draft selections I referenced from this class that are already on different teams for a variety of reasons. So there always is that component of, yes, like you have underperformed and, we're just going to cut ties, whether it's in a trade or whatever the case may be, or it's okay, no, you haven't been what we wanted you to be. We still are holding out hope but we're also not going to pay you off of like hope. We're going to pay you for what you produced. And if that's not a whole lot, well, I mean, for the team, bottom line financially, that's not necessarily a big thing for them.
Another, like, going back to what Josh was trying to bring up just in terms of the context and stuff, another thing that I think teams don't do that great of a job of, and I think there's like sort of a PR element to this, is like the idea of, oh, we're sending a guy to the G League as that's like a criticism of the player. When in reality, I feel like even high lottery drafted guys should go to the G League. I think it's a great opportunity to, play at a higher level. The G League is at a higher level than the college game. But, it's a little bit easier of an adjustment for these guys. Get to the point where, okay, we're seeing this guy succeed at the G League level. Now let's introduce him and give him some minutes at the big club. I think more teams should do that, and more teams should be willing to do that with higher picks.
I completely agree with that, especially if the player has a particular role or expectation you have for them that's maybe a little bit down the road. They're not ready for that role right now, but that role is what you projected them to. That's why you drafted them so high. Why not give them some more reps against, G League competition in that role and help them start to develop and ease that transition into the professional level in that role with your G League affiliate, as opposed to, taking a player who you hope to one day maybe become your primary on-ball creator, but maybe right now they're mostly 3-and-D plus maybe attack closeouts is all you really want them to do with the main team. You probably want them to get some reps, some touches as that focal point, and outside of blowouts, your best bet is to do what Garrett just said.
Yeah, I guess that's also a thing I'd like to ask. I guess a question, like piggybacking off of that, why the G League looked at so bad for higher picks, because you look at guys in the second round or undrafted guys, you're like, oh, they're going to get some run in insert local team G League affiliate, right? But when it comes to higher draft picks, it's looked at as a knock on them for having to go to G League, even though some of these guys you pick so high, and we can go down a few of them, like, yeah, that's really on what they could be, but you're not drafting them, or at least you shouldn't be drafting them, on what immediate impact you think they will bring from the jump.
Yeah, and I think, honestly, it goes back somewhat to the G League's original name, the D League, which, again, makes sense. It's a developmental league, so D League makes sense. But we're also in the United States, where our educational system is based on a grading criteria where D is bad. You hear, or even just like Hollywood gossip and stuff. Oh, that's a D-list actor. Like it's a put down. It's viewed as like, it'll do. It's not great. It's not good. It'll do. It's fine. And then on top of it, there are significant real differences between life in the G League and life with an NBA team in terms of the travel, the accommodations where you stay, that sort of thing, that can be jarring if you are, particularly most lotto picks are guys who played at bigger schools in the NCAA, probably had a fair amount of prestige, probably were big men on campus, all that sort of stuff. And now you're probably staying in worse hotels than you did while in college, and with worse travel than you did in college.
Yeah, and I think something that, maybe people don't fully appreciate, and the idea is like, well, if they're mentally weak enough to like lose confidence and never make it, like they were never going to make it anyway. I don't ever like really agree with that sentiment. I think like even the greatest of superstars, they have gotten that arrogance, that confidence, that level of ego. It's like building blocks, right? Like you have success at high school, you have success at college, You then see yourself doing well in the pros, and then you see yourself doing extremely well in the pros. And just over time, the guy goes, okay, I just know I'm one of the best players in the league, right? But, for some of these guys, they're 19 years old. They're coming into a situation where, yeah, maybe the context isn't too good. They're thrust into a role that exceeds what they're capable of in the moment. And those building blocks of confidence just never happen. And therefore, we never see what they could have been in a different environment. And, so, yeah, like, that's where I go back to what Josh was saying initially. The context is everything. Like, it's so important. There are certain guys that really like flamed out that in a different situation might have been all-stars and perennial all-stars.
Yeah, very true. Very true. And in fact, I kind of want to shift from, we're kind of doing more bigger points, and let's kind of zone in and focus in on not even players specifically for well, this is why they didn't make it, but more like a case study type conversation point on like, okay, these players, I think, like, it was never the proper fit, whether it was team construction or, we're going to go right into this to begin with, because there was a few different cases, and I think this one team crossed them all, whether it wasn't the right fit of the player, whether it wasn't proper evaluation, whether that be talent-wise, whether that be personal character evaluation-wise, whatever the case may be, like why certain fits just didn't work. And for that, let's start with, I used to live down there, but lovely Arizona, the Phoenix Suns, and mid to late 2010s was an interesting time. But Josh, take it away from there. Let's kind of lay out some players and let's start the conversation from there, or continue. Rather.
Yeah. So of the 14 lotto picks who had either their third or fourth year options declined, here are just a few that were drafted by the Phoenix Suns. Earl Clark in 2009, Kendall Marshall in 2012,
like a legend.
Dragon Bender and Marquise Chris in 2016, Josh Jackson in 2017, and Jalen Smith in 2020. Kind of sensing a theme here.
Yeah. Garrett, do you want to kind of lead off with some of the thoughts you have there? Josh, we'll kind of go around and go from there, because that literally takes the cake of different evaluation points. Okay, this one didn't fit, like I said, personalized. This one was never a proper fit for the draft selection. Just all over. The Suns ran the gamut there, it seemed.
Well, yeah, and that's where I don't know if there is actually a theme. I feel like there's actually multiple ways that they screwed up with those picks. Like, you've got very different sort of archetypes of failed draft picks there. I would say your Marquise Chris's and your Josh Jacksons of the world are guys that, were really good athletically in certain respects, but the skill just was never quite there. And then you've got guys like, who is the lefty point guard from North Carolina?
Kendall Marshall.
Kendall Marshall is a guy that, just was never a good enough athlete to succeed in the NBA. And he was a, really good college point guard at running the show. And he's a good passer and all of that. But, it just got to a point in the NBA where it's like, well, if you don't have the ability to get by your man, that passing doesn't really matter as much. So they failed in various ways. But I think the biggest thing is that, when you're talking about guys that really succeed, when you're looking at them at a college level, you got to say, okay, this guy is really great at what? And when you look at that, it's like, okay, Marquise Chris, really good at jumping. He's got a great vertical, but that was about the only thing he was great at.
Yeah.
And I think
thank you.
That's another thing, just in terms of one of the biggest mistakes a lot of teams make is they look at a guy and see one great athletic trait and think he's all around a great athlete, when in reality, it's just maybe he's fast or maybe he jumps high, but he doesn't move his feet well. He doesn't have good lateral quickness, So that to me is some of the biggest issues that you've seen with Phoenix in particular in some of their failed picks over the years.
I just want to build off what Garrett said, because it's a point that I love and a point I've been arguing with friends over for years, which is especially as you get higher up the levels of competition in basketball, no good coach is looking down the bench and being like, Garrett, get in there because you run fast. Corban, I want you in there because you jump high. No, all tools, all athletic traits need to be applied to have any value on the basketball court. So an elite athlete in drills and stuff doesn't mean anything if they're not using those athletic skills to contribute defensively, to contribute on the boards, to contribute in terms of like being able to generate shot opportunities for themselves or teammates. Kendall Marshall, for instance, Garrett put it perfectly. He had an elite NBA skill. He was a really good passer. The problem is if you can't cause an advantage in the first place, it minimizes your ability to pass in the first anyway. Mm-hmm. So you have to kind of have both sides of the thing. You have to have enough athleticism and other complementary skill sets to let you maximize what you do well. But you also can't just rely on athleticism. It has to be tied to something impactful, and typically it has to be associated with a skill that you bring.
Yeah, and to add to that whole applied athleticism thing, I think a good example of this, and to talk about a different sport just for a moment, but like with the NFL, you see these guys without pads running a 40, right? And they have a really impressive 40 time. And then you see someone else who in pads in the game, because not only do they have good awareness, they react quickly, but they talk about this on the draft. It's like, oh, he plays faster than the 40 time shows. And it's because he's applying his speed with his intelligence, with his processing. And that's where, yeah, exactly, Josh, the athleticism, you need to see it actually applied to the game of basketball, not just, his shuttle time going back and forth from one side of the key to the other was elite. Like, no, you want to see him like, is he cutting guys off on defense? Is he rotating quickly in a game? That's where you want to see that. And then, yeah, if what you see in the film, then also he's having good numbers in the combine, then that can reinforce what you saw. But you don't want to just purely focus on the numbers and be like, yeah, he was never making plays on the court, but he these numbers indicate that he will. It's like, no, you gotta just focus on what you're seeing.
That actually was going to lead right into my next kind of question or point. How much of in scouting and evaluating do you look at, okay, this is what a player needs to do to be successful. They don't actually do it right now, but it's almost like that one. I mean, I'm the king of this, being a fan of the NBA players that I'm a fan of. Like, it hasn't worked for them in these other stops, but it might work for us, And I look back looking at Marquise Chris. There was a piece by Jonathan Watson.
It might work for Russ.
Oh, wow, the slander. You know what? Well done. I'll give you that. That was 2021 with the Lakers. Well done, Garrett, because I legit did with the Lakers, and I knew it wouldn't work, and I went, but maybe, but whatever. I'm taking it back. Okay, back onto the main subject here. Like, when you have a player that, again, you look at it and they don't have this, but it's like if they do unlock these skills, then they will be this, top tier, whatever NBA player. But, it's not what they have right now. Marquise Chris there was an article I read a little bit ago in preparation for this podcast by Jonathan Wasserman back in 2016, May 3rd, 2016. Went to his strengths. He put up good numbers in college, 13 points, 5 rebounds, 52% from the field, 35% from three, didn't have polish and strength, but was efficient inside the arc. That should have been a warning right there. Some of his strengths was world-class athleticism, the bounciest prospect in the draft, a stud athlete, all of that, right? Weaknesses. Not only was he a foul machine in college, and that was kind of a thing in the NBA, but here were 2 things that stood out. This is like legit quote. For Chris to evolve into the mismatch, his best case scenario mirror reflects, the jumper will have to become a reliable everyday weapon, given his lack of material presence. His form looked promising, but he just shot 68% from the line and hit 0.63 per game. Now, his NBA career, I mean, the dude is only 26, so I don't want to say it's over. But for his career, and this is spread across, 7 seasons, he shot 29% from three, 66% from the free throw line. So, no, it didn't become what it should have been there. And then defensively, there was questions about, listen, he can make the highlight reel block, but can he bang down low and can he hold his own in the paint? I think we see the answer to that as well. So, I guess the question I have is how much of, in drafting, and I guess this is specifically with Phoenix, where you're looking at the top 2 outcome of what this player could be and not seeing the forest from the trees in terms of, well, this is what they are and this is what we kind of have to work with right now. And if so, does that make a good fit, for our team?
Yeah, so not to humble brag, but I used to teach a course on how to scout with former NBA Executive of the Year, Mark Warkentine, rest in peace, my friend. And the first class, every single time, we would start off with this one question. If you only answer one thing in your scouting report and you want to still do your job well, what are you looking for when you're scouting a player? And we'd get all sorts of answers. People be like, oh, their attitude, their athleticism, their offense, their defense, blah, blah, blah. The real answer is, what does this player do that's going to earn them minutes for our team specifically, or if you're not working for a team on this level of competition specifically, that's going to get them court time. And not 5 years from now, which you can't predict, but right now. What's going to get them minutes so that they can work on their other things that they need development on? And I think sometimes in the NBA, there's a very strong emphasis on 5 years down the line when they're in their prime. That's what we're looking for. But if you've ever read Super Forecasting by Philip E. Tetlock, which is one of my favorite books of all time, basically the best experts in any field are no better than 50% chance at their predictions beyond a 2-year period. And that's the best experts. The top 5% of experts in any field are no better than a coin flip beyond a 2-year period, generally speaking. And yet we operate from the perspective of 5 years down the line, once this guy learns how to play, he's going to be nice. But you can't predict that. And people will say, oh, well, what about the Victor Wembanyama's and the LeBron Jameses, and they're guaranteed. Nothing's guaranteed. LeBron could have slipped on some icy stairs early in Cleveland and tore every single thing in his knee. You can't really predict with too much confidence. And I think sometimes we're so focused on upside and potential that we often will give them credit for skills they don't currently have. I like this player a lot because if he ever learns to shoot, holy crap, because it complements everything else. But I'm admitting right now he sucks at shooting. But because he sucks at shooting, I actually like him more. Because if he gets better at shooting...
Is this Sam Presti on the line?
If he gets better at shooting, blah, blah, blah. And I think another aspect of projection, like you're saying, that sometimes people struggle with when it comes to scouting is you have to be very clear on why is this player successful at what they do right now that would earn the minutes, and how does that translate to the next level? Because let's take Thomas Robinson, drafted number 5th overall, 2013, built like a brick shit house. If we were playing pickup, he's the first pick, clearly. Just, you look at him, you pick him, right?
That's an NBA player, yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
exactly.
Mhm.
On top of it,
Before he
fantastic
shoots.
human being, super nice guy. Everyone loves him. The problem is if you like, he put up great numbers in the college season before he got drafted. Again, looks the part, great numbers, great guy. But if you actually watched and really dug into, you'd realize like the bulk of his success came from him being so much physically stronger and quicker than his defenders. He had no go-to move in the post. He had no face-up game. And the only thing that was going to translate on the NBA level against bigger, faster, stronger, smarter, more experienced defenders was his rebounding. And that did translate, but the offense never came through, and his fourth-year option was declined, and he didn't really have much of a career. And a large part of that is like, how are you projecting that particular reason for success on an NBA context where, like I said, everything, all the levels are raised. You know, the athleticism of your defenders are raised. The intelligence and experience that you're going against is elevated. So even if you're like the most elite athlete ever, your athletic advantage is still going to be reduced on the NBA level compared to the college level.
And yeah, like I think another guy like Thomas Robinson that was a lot better in college than he was in the NBA was Tyler Hansbrough for a lot of the same reasons. And yeah, he didn't really have any go-to moves. It was really just, I'm just going to bully the guy. I'm just going to shoot right over the top. And you can't do that against other guys that are your exact height and your exact level or even better athleticism-wise. But then, like, at the same time, you'll have a guy like Blake Griffin, who I also feel like didn't really have post moves, but he was even a notch higher in terms of his athleticism, that he could get away with that at the NBA level. He was actually elite at an NBA level, whereas Thomas Robinson was an elite athlete at a college level. So that's also a big difference, is like understanding, okay, when you're evaluating a guy, is this guy just a good athlete, or is this guy a top 1% of NBA player level athletes? And that's a big difference. There's also the element of going back to what Josh said, where the best evaluators are like 50% odds. Like there's so many variables beyond the context that we've talked about, beyond just their mentality. Like, a guy like Ja Morant was in college just considered this absolutely like, great guy off the court, great leader, no issues. And now we've seen in the NBA, he's had some off the court issues. I don't think anyone could have predicted that. And same with like some guys that, maybe, have some personality issues in college, but then clean up their act at the NBA level. Like there's some things you just can't predict. You also, based on development and a guy's personality, his competitive desire, his will to win, like you can somewhat project, okay, this guy's going to be a hard worker, but it's also hard to compare. Like, okay, there's some guys that work really hard, but they don't have significant improvement over the course of their NBA career, versus someone like Jimmy Butler, who's a hard worker and has improved dramatically. So that's why it is such a crapshoot, is because there's so many variables and there's so many things that even if you have a good sense of a player at a specific point in time, that can change.
Yeah, you also need, like, there's all the team related, like that's the stuff that players have some control over, right? Like the opportunity with teams also can really impact how well a player can grow into what you project them to be or not. Like, and this is a tangent from like the list of players, but like, does Michael Redd get to become an all-star if Ray Allen's never traded from Milwaukee?
Oh, okay. That's interesting. Yeah, or like
And
Nikola Jokic if Yusuf Nurkic wasn't blocking him.
I mean, we all knew
Just
pretty
messing on
quickly. But yes, yeah.
But you get the idea.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, exactly.
Well, and Michael Redd is a great example of somebody who in college was not that great of a shooter. And he
Nope.
excelled in the NBA because of his jump shot. So that was where a skill that he really didn't show too much at the college level for scouts to see was the skill that allowed him to excel. Like, how do you predict that? How do you see that? And that's why he was such a low draft pick.
Yeah, yeah. It's tough. It's a very tough thing to do.
I definitely want to circle back just real quick because you did mention how much of a crapshoot it is, Garrett, in terms of character, right? But we see so many players. I mean, we were just talking with obviously, Josh Primo, Kai Jones. Kai Jones is a little different, but
totally different. But
yeah, exactly. Like it's not on court per se; it's other things. That's probably a better way of saying it. Josh Jackson was one for me because there was stuff swirling, but we didn't really know. But how it is so hard to, put into context, and that's such a messy word to use in relation to basketball and people, but the crossroads between that as an evaluator is just so weird because you are looking for basketball talent, but being not a horrible person would be great. That's a big bonus, but also you don't want to just go for the complete worst or things that just pop up. How do you contextualize that? And I'm gonna go to Josh Earl with contextualized scouting because I definitely want to
get that's the name.
That's
the name of my business. The actual LLC I run.
There's the plug.
and also, like I mentioned, Mark Orkentine, my friend, he used to joke that he was surprised I didn't have context tattooed on my knuckles like Jason Williams has White Boy. Because I said context all the time because I think it's an important thing. And that's the tough part, contextualizing things from different environments. So maybe everything in their collegiate environment worked perfectly to set them up to perform well on the court and off the court be a good person and all that sort of stuff. The number one thing Mark always said was the toughest thing when it came to personnel decisions, particularly with the draft, is you never know how somebody's going to react to generational wealth. And that's not to say these players all of a sudden get lazy or this or that, but that's a massive variable that there's no way you can kind of do background research on it and be like, well, let me give him $1 million right now and see how he does before we consider drafting him. So that's a big thing. And then, relationships with your coworkers. This is something all of us experience. I guarantee you, Corban, Garrett, and myself have all had some coworkers that we work perfectly with. It's synergistic and it's beautiful basketball type work. And then there are other coworkers where we're like, oh, I hate everything right now. I don't this. Mm-hmm. This makes me not work well. And when you factor that in, plus new coaches, again, your whole context as a player changes too, unless you're one of the top 5 picks generally. You're probably coming from being the man in high school and the man in college to now we want you standing in the corner for X number of possessions. And, in practice, you're not going to be getting, on ball opportunities. We're trying to convert you into a 3-and-D. There's a lot of contextual shift between that just from an off-court perspective that, again, you can't really predict to a certain extent. And then there's the question, and this is something I always butted heads with Mark about. Mark was actually the recruiting assistant coach for Tarkanian at UNLV with the Runnin' Rebels, particularly around the time that they went to the back-to-back Final Fours. And so Mark, who also worked with the Portland Trail Blazers, you may see where I'm going with this, Corban. Mark had a theory where, like, you don't need a bunch of Boy Scouts on your team. If they're talented enough, you can make it work. And to some extent, that's true. But also, like, where do you draw the line as an organization and as a scout yourself in terms of, like, this is a red flag? Or like, how do you weigh talent versus off the court concerns? And that's a difficult thing. That is something I think organizations have to really, when they get their front office together and their scouting staff together before the season, like, you need to clarify, like, what are we trying to accomplish here, and how do we calibrate our entire group so that we're on the same page as to, like, yeah, this guy's talented, but he's not a fit for our culture, or that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think Kevin Porter Jr. is the perfect example of this.
Bingo.
Right? Like, he fell late in the first round, and the Cavs decided, okay, despite the issues that we see off the court, we're going to take a risk and take a chance. They drafted him. He did some bad stuff. They cut him immediately. And then another team, the Houston Rockets, decided we're going to give him a second chance, and we're going to take a chance on him. And then, they just traded him recently because he did some more bad stuff. So, the teams are constantly struggling with that. And, Josh, when you were talking about the coaches too, when we're talking about all of the variables that, make scouting difficult, like, the coach that the player is playing for is another variable, because you could have a coach that's a very sort of strict disciplinarian type, and that just butts heads with certain personalities. Or you could, have a kind of a loosey-goosey kind of chill coach, and a player needs somebody that is going to get on them more. So, that also is context that is super important and can alter guys' careers.
Yeah, and that gets back to, again, that first question that Mark and I were always trying to get our scouting students to focus on, because the context is to our team. How are they going to earn minutes on our team? And one of the examples I always used to use at the time, because this was a while ago, was like Roy Hibbert had a high-level NBA skill that he brought to the table. He was an elite rim protector until he wasn't, but he was an elite rim protector, right? But would Roy Hibbert get minutes for the Denver Nuggets under George Karl, where they're always trying to push the pace, they're trying to take advantage of the elevation? Would Roy Hibbert be the right choice for the Nuggets, knowing that Roy Hibbert is an NBA level player and an impactful NBA level player? But would he be that in that Nuggets context under how George coaches? And that's not even factoring like what Garrett said in terms of like the personality of the coach and how the coach interacts with players.
Yeah, that's interesting. I that's one of those situations where I don't know. Again, a coach and the way that a team is around a player, whether in locks and whether you have a more offensive heavy coach. I'm going back to Kendall Marshall. Some of it was internal development on his own end, but some of it, like when he went to the Lakers, I said Laker legend, in that 2014, 2015 season, like he had a run of just good double-doubles. And a lot of that was really just a scheme. Like Kendall Marshall definitely became a better three-point shooter for sure, but he didn't become faster. Like he always had the vision. He wasn't that much more impactful of a player in that way. It was more of the pace with which he was able to play with, and the people he was able to play with more that kind of unlocked that. And, when he went to Phoenix, I mean, obviously it was a different situation. Actually, I don't think it was D'Antoni. Was that Byron Scott as the coach? I'm trying to remember. Those were the lost year of the Lakers. It might have been Byron Scott. I definitely don't think it was Luke Walton. I think he came after. Watch me do real time.
I feel like it might have been D'Antoni that one particular year.
You're probably right. That's 2014.
I think so.
Yeah,
I think that was D'Antoni.
No, you're right. 2013, 2014. Yeah. Thank you. Yep. And like career highs, you know what I mean? 39% from three, 8 points and 8 assists a game. Started 45 games and then like went to Milwaukee, off of the high of that strong team, the Lakers, and went down to earth, was out the league 2 years later, and then retired like 2 years after that. Like, a lot of
but
it
even here, I think there's the context is important to factor in. Like that Lakers team wasn't very good, right?
Well,
So
true, but neither was that 2013 Phoenix Suns team.
Right, but I'm saying like even though Kendall Marshall was like putting up stats, he was putting up some stats on a pretty poor basketball team. And so, yeah,
I see what you're saying. No, I guess what I'm arguing is more of the opportunity because like he on an equally bad basketball team the year before, he wasn't putting up numbers, right? Which is why the Suns like cut ties on him to begin with. You're right, like that wasn't he had a short win streak. I remember a few wins in that Lakers season, but you're right, it wasn't impacting winning basketball in a major way, but it was making him look like an actual NBA player, right? With more minutes, and that's what I'm saying. He went from 14 minutes a game to almost 30, and the production picked up. And then he went off to a different team, a different role, and then he was gone. So no, I definitely agree with you. Like it's not classic in my mind, big numbers on a bad team, which it kind of was, but at the same time, like he was on bad teams for the majority of his career. Like he ended his career in the 2015-2016 Philadelphia 76ers. Like, and those numbers just never went back to it. So like you're right, context is important on all of that.
But yeah, and I think this is where this is kind of a bit of a tangent or a different subject, but like this is where the whole most improved player thing goes awry because you have a lot of guys win that award, not because they actually improved as basketball players, but because they went from playing 8 minutes a game to 35 minutes a game. And therefore their stats went up. But if you look at their per 36 numbers, it's almost identical.
Cam Thomas, shout out.
Exactly.
Wow. Wow. I mean, listen, I'm actually Cam Thomas should be my kind of guy, and to a certain extent he is. But like people run away with like Cam Thomas train. I'm like, let's look at the numbers for a second. Like I'm not saying, and look at the defense side of the ball, and look at a few other things. Like, yeah, again, I agree, Gary, and same with you, Josh. Like, there's a lot more context to it. But let's kind of throw out some players. We kind of have been, but outside of Phoenix, I mean, let's go to Charlotte, for example. And in general, they've had a few. Charlotte and Washington are two teams to me that are so interesting because they always end up the last at least 4, 5, 6 years in the middle of the lottery, right? Like they're not really going with like the 1 through 5 spot. It's really more like the 8 through 13 or something like that. And yet every player they pick, you look back and you're like, varying levels of to know they weren't good. While players that obviously came before them but also came after them stand out, And so I wonder, like, what is it about, I guess, drafting philosophy, whatever the case may be, in terms of like middle of the pack, because you're drafting a player that you want to contribute. You're trying to figure out what you are as a team, and then also like where this player slides in with your current team direction. And in some cases, I mean, we've seen the Wizards give up on a few guys now that didn't fit in with whatever team direction they were trying to go on, and they go to a different team in a different role, and all of a sudden, I'm looking at Rui Hachimura, like they look better. You know what I mean? But I'm very curious on like more of players in that ilk and what goes wrong, like kind of just talking through some of that.
Sorry, I was muted. No, on my side, it's difficult because I think a lot of scouting success comes down to the team's self-awareness. Like you have to be brutally honest with yourself as a team and know yourself so well that you understand, okay, these are the schemes we're trying to run on offense and defense, and this is why we're trying to run those on offense and defense. These are our current core guys, and how strongly do we feel about them, or might we be open to moving them? Because that obviously changes our perspective. Washington, for instance, a team that did not want to rebuild. They did not want to fully rebuild. They always thought like, okay, well, if, John Wall and Bradley Beal were healthy, and then if Bradley Beal and XYZ were healthy, we feel we could be a playoff team. And so you might go for a guy, and I actually really like this player, Corey Kispert. Corey Kispert's a guy who I think could be really helpful on almost every team. His skill set is such that's the case. The problem is Corey Kispert's probably most helpful for a team that's in the playoffs. Corey Kispert on a woeful team that's not even really having any success in like the play-in range isn't necessarily as good a use of a draft pick if your team is in that context, right? So I think a lot of it really comes down to, like I said, self-awareness as a team. Like, what are we currently trying to do? Where do we stand currently? And the two teams you mentioned, Charlotte and Washington, I think this is a big problem. Both of them think they're playoff teams. Like, both of them think, like, if we had a little less injury problems, we'd be in the thick of it for a playoff spot. And that's not necessarily, an honest assessment. And that's why we've seen a different approach from Washington in particular under this new front office staff, where they took, Bilal Coulibaly, who, in a lot of contexts would be viewed as kind of like more of a raw prospect who's got a lot of areas he needs to develop for him to be, an impactful player for a strong playoff team. But he also has a lot of promising aspects that could be particularly useful for a team that's starting to identify who they want to be going forward and what they want to become. So, like, I think a lot of it comes down to that.
Well, yeah, and it feels like we're kind of trending into the conversation of, like, and I know we've talked about this on other podcasts, but the whole idea of, like, best player available versus fit. And I think that's, like Josh said, it's context dependent. Like, if you're a team, like the Warriors were when they drafted the likes of James Wiseman and Jonathan Kuminga, they were a really good basketball team that just needed some guys that would contribute at a rotation player level. And they went and drafted guys that were 3 or 4 years, or what was the famous phrase by, I forget his name.
2 years away from being 2 years away.
Exactly. They went for that method, and it obviously has didn't pan out, especially with Wiseman, and Kuminga didn't really help them the first couple of years of his career, although he has shown some signs to be a helpful rotation player this season. But in that context, they should draft someone like Corey Kispert, right? Whereas, yes, with the Wizards and where they are, they should be, instead of drafting Kispert because they're a bad basketball team, they should be drafting, which, again, they seem to be going in the right direction now with the new front office of drafting someone like Bilal Coulibaly, a guy with more upside that can be a foundational piece. And then you get your Kisperts in 3 or 4 years' time once you've got those foundational pieces in-house.
I agree. And it actually goes to a player that I think is interesting that Washington has currently. And I was very high on them. I'm not going to say how high I was. I want some reputability. I think that's the word. Yep. But Johnny Davis, just watching, just like what he was in college, what his weaknesses were, what he looked like, and where the team thought that they were and where he fit in, right? And obviously that hasn't worked out as of yet. He's getting more of an opportunity on like a god-awful Wizards team, but like, again, even that hasn't really seen, okay, it's Johnny Davis breakout time based off of what the Wizards front office thought, and some of us as well thought they were seeing from him in college.
Also, I don't necessarily expect Johnny Davis to become one of these 3rd or 4th year option denied type players, because, again, it's fairly rare. But he's the type that is at particular risk for this type of situation because he's what Mark used to call a basketball orphan. The front office staff, the decision makers who selected him no longer work for the team. He's nobody's guy there. Just like Tyus Jones, fantastic player who's on the Wizards now, was drafted by his hometown Minnesota Timberwolves, but like they promptly changed front office staff, and all of a sudden Tyus wasn't getting much opportunity because, like, he's not my guy. I might, people might come in and might have an affinity for a player who's already there, but more often they're not somebody that you were really pushing hard in the draft decision making to say like, hey, this is a guy we really need. And so those players can often find themselves, sometimes through no fault of their own, in these types of situations where, previously the front office and the coaching staff were all in on my development and focused on me. And now there's a whole new staff in both the front office and coaching, because that's usually how it works. And they're not as fond of me. like, yeah, we'll still help you develop, but guess what? We don't picture you in the role that the previous group did.
And speaking to Johnny Davis, and I also think Corban will be mad at me that I'm going to use this player as an example similar to Johnny Davis, but Jalen Hood-Schifino, both guys that I think at the college level were really good at like the tough shot making, kind of in the mid range, but like they're not guys that are blowing past defenders at the college level. They're elite at a skill. But again, they're doing it against guys that they're more athletic than, they're bigger than. And then all of a sudden in the NBA, they're not more athletic than them. They're not bigger than them. And that becomes extremely difficult. And you have to become like a DeMar DeRozan level at that particular skill, at that tough shot making, which again goes from being not just elite at a college level, but elite at an NBA level is a big difference. And, to then succeed. And DeRozan, it took a while. It took a lot of years of development and hard work for him to get to that point. So, yeah, that's where like guys like Johnny Davis, I don't really see a great path for him to succeed unless, we're talking about him as a vastly improved player in a few years' time to even get to a level where, that he would deserve to have a third or fourth year options picked up.
No, I agree. Bringing up Jalen Hood-Schifino, it's kind of sore right now, but no, I'm playing. I was actually with Josh when we were watching the draft together in the draft, and I wasn't a fan of that because you're right. Like some of, and mind you, it's still time, like it's way early. I just would have went with Cam. Like that was my guy. Like that was the guy I wanted. But outside of that, personal philosophy aside, like if you are a good shot maker in the college level, that is great. Like good to see buckets. I love it. All the things, right? But how does that translate to the NBA where the defenders are better, right? And if you're having trouble, creating separation against guys who, let's be real, not all of them are making the league, right? How are we going to do that in a situation where like these are legit NBA players, where like the guys come off the bench are capable lockdown guys? And we've seen a little bit of that because he did not have a very good preseason. Like it was not great, in a situation now where the league has been ravaged by injuries early. He's not getting run, even though he is potentially about the same size-ish kind of player as like a Cam Reddish, who is getting significant time and who, in my own opinion, and maybe that's a conversation we can talk about in a minute with him and RJ Barrett, like is not good enough defensively to be as bad as he's been offensively. And that's kind of what he's seen there. But like, I agree with you. Like some of it you do have to take into account. Okay, like yes, in college, that's a great skill. Glad it looks good there. How is that going to translate? And if it's hard, if you have to really squint to make that happen, well, then maybe you should reconsider a little bit.
This plays right into the situation with Josh Jackson, and B, one of the things that I feel very strongly about when it comes to player projection in scouting, which is I believe in a thing that some strengths aren't actually strengths and some weaknesses aren't actually weaknesses. And so with Josh Jackson, for example, I'll use him as an example. There was a lot of interest in him for defensive potential, athleticism and stuff. And the offensive notes in almost all of his scouting reports was like, he has a pretty solid handle for like his size, for his role in college, which was as a 4. Like he has a pretty solid handle. That's not an actual strength though, because he was going, and this gets into something else I've talked with Corban about before in regards to another guy who had an option decline, Joe Alexander, as well as one of Corban's favorite guys, Michael Beasley and Carmelo Anthony. But he had a handle that worked against college fours. And yet, on the NBA level, he was projected to play the wing primarily. So he's going against, generally speaking, much better defenders in terms of lateral quickness, and being used to defending face-up situations, albeit usually from further out than in the mid-post. So that's an example, like the Johnny Davis and Jalen Hood-Schifino hard shot making thing. That's a nice cherry on top. That itself is not an NBA level skill. And the reason why, and that also goes for like Adam Morrison, who was another like elite in college, like hard shot scorer. But on the NBA level, guess what? Your margin for error shrinks a lot. And those types of things don't work as well. And, you know, you have to view it like, take, again, Josh Jackson. Even if you do think he has a good enough handle that could be something positive for how you project his role on the NBA level, is his handle good enough where as an NBA team, you are going to run possessions through him? And if the answer is no, then that's not, that strength is not a strength. It's a bonus. And there's a flip to that too. Like Lauri Markkanen, there was a lot about like Lauri never blocks shots. He's going to be atrocious on defense in the NBA. And you have to look at the college context where like he was the primary scorer for his team in college. And I guarantee you his coach did not want him getting into foul trouble. So guess what? He contested with verticality and didn't try to block any shots. Now, is that potentially a problem on the NBA level? Sure, if you're expecting Lauri Markkanen to be your rim protector. But if you're not expecting Lauri Markkanen to be a rim protector and you're expecting to potentially play him with one, is that weakness necessarily a major red flag? No.
Yeah, and it's those are all great points. And yeah, like even the weaknesses that certain players have, like, you know, when you talk about shooting, I think like Ausar Thompson is a fascinating case from this past year's draft where, you know, based on what I saw from the tape, I was much more confident in the idea of Amen Thompson being a primary creator because it seemed like his handle was better. He played point guard for the team that they both played on. And then, yes, Amen Thompson's shot didn't project to be as good as Ausar's, but if Ausar was off the ball and playing more off the ball, even if his shot was a little bit better than Amen Thompson's, I think the fact that both of their shots are weaknesses, I think it's a bigger deal for Ausar. Now, some guys can get over that, like an Andre Iguodala was just so good at everything else that you can make up for that. But that's another factor when you're talking about, okay, what if this guy is not going to be a superstar level player? And that's another thing with Josh Jackson, where he was kind of a role player even in college, and he did it at a really high level. But he was also kind of going to be a role player at the NBA level as well. And then all of a sudden, the fact that his shot was a weakness is a lot bigger of a deal at that point if you're playing off the ball more. So the role and the level of player that they're going to get to, that also impacts, you know, what strengths and weaknesses really end up mattering.
No, I agree. I mean, it goes. I mean, and there's another. Who am I thinking of? Not. There's another player. I don't want to say the Marvin Williams archetype. That'd be disrespectful to Marvin Williams. But a guy who was, you know, drafted higher than he should have been. Marvin Williams carved out a very productive like career in the NBA. Like even when he retired, he still wanted and was expecting the contract. He was like, I'm done. Like even with that was there. But there's a few guys who I've seen. I wish I could drop their names right now. I don't know, like Portland got them. That's what I remember. Portland during the Damian Lillard era was very interesting in terms of their draft picks. But like a guy who, again, like you said, okay, if they're rolling in college, it's like And some of them stand out and they become this breakout star, right? And they just need the role and they just need the opportunity. But other ones, it's like, no, kind of what you saw is what you get. Is very much what we talked about a little bit earlier in terms of what we're seeing in college and how much we take stock of that, because it is so interesting in terms of the projecting that we have to do, or the projecting that needs to be done to see how they fit in. And also you do have those leaps and bounds. Jimmy Butler being what he became, right? Paul George being what he became, Kawhi Leonard being what he became. All of those were looked at as very good NBA players. They're all drafted, well, not Jimmy, but like Paul and Kawhi were drafted,
top 15.
Top 15, exactly. But like they reached that high-end outcome. And in some cases, I think Kawhi exceeded that because the jumper was the biggest issue, and he's one of the most efficient shooters out there.
Throw Pascal into that group too.
But I will.
Guys who just had like demonstrably like impressive development, particularly going from an expectation of a more defensive impact type player to taking on primary offensive actions. Like that's a development that outside of those 4 players, I can't really say that I've seen much. That's a really hard developmental mountain to climb. And it's also something that wasn't expected of those guys. So like sometimes the biggest steals and biggest draft successes are guys you didn't even really expect. So over my shoulder, you guys can't see this, but like Corban and Garrett know, I have a framed picture of Tim Duncan and a framed picture of Manu Ginobili over my shoulder. And obviously the Spurs had high expectations for Tim. Manu, they did not expect to be Manu. They got him with the 57th pick. Like if they really thought Manu would have the career he had, they would have traded for an earlier pick to take him earlier. The Nuggets, if they really thought Nikola Jokic was going to become the best player on the planet and a multi-time MVP, guess what? They wouldn't have waited until 41 to draft him. So like a lot of times it is that weird synchronicity of like opportunity, environment, role, the player's own development and approach to things that creates these particular successes. And unfortunately, on the flip side, it also contributes to some of these big misses. Oftentimes through no fault of the player necessarily. I want to touch on the thing I mentioned about Josh, that applied to Josh Jackson, as well as Michael Beasley, Joe Alexander, and Carmelo Anthony, because it's also a projection thing. And in particular, it's for college 4s. So all of those guys were college 4s. Joe Alexander had a lot of success using his very high level athleticism to beat the hell out of college 4s off the dribble and face up situations and stuff. But the Milwaukee Bucks thought that Joe Alexander projected to be more of a shooting guard or a small forward, which, like I mentioned, you're already making a leap to bigger, faster, stronger, smarter, more experienced defenders. But when you're also shifting up a position along the perimeter, those players are even more experienced and understanding of how to defend face-up actions than most like power forwards or centers. On top of it, it tends to move you further away from the basket in terms of the areas on the court in which you're operating in. So most of those players, and correct me if I'm wrong, Corban, like Michael Beasley, Carmelo Anthony, most of them operated in the mid post in college. And so if they are beating their defender in that situation, they're getting to the free throw line or to the rim. But when you switch them out to small forward or shooting guard, they're more often operating along the 3-point line. So if they beat their defender, they're now looking at mid-range pull-ups as opposed to layups and drawing fouls. On top of it, almost all of those players saw their elite collegiate rebounding rates drop precipitously in the NBA because, again, they're moving further away from rebounding range. So I think particularly for college fours, and this is partially what happened with Josh Jackson and Joe Alexander, is if they decide to switch you to more of a perimeter role, they're neutering some of your strengths that got you drafted in the first place. And because of that, you're going to have lower production compared to higher expectations, which is a recipe for having your options declined. And obviously, if you're Michael Beasley or Carmelo's level, like it didn't really impact their careers much because like they were already still playing at a high enough level where they're going to get contracts, they're going to get the sort of thing. But for those players like a Joe Alexander or a Josh Jackson, that shift in projected role from, like a face up big on the college level against collegiate fours to NBA perimeter player against NBA wing defenders is a steep shift, in my opinion, and it typically causes problems.
Yeah, and I want to go back to because you guys were talking about Kawhi earlier, and Kawhi was a college four that ended up kind of shifting to an NBA three, and in large part he was able to do that because the shot came around, right? And also I'll say another thing that I think is really underrated about Kawhi's development into a superstar is the handle. Like he developed the handle significantly over the course of his time in San Antonio. And the other thing too, when you're talking about like your scouting department has to also be, has to communicate with your development staff, right? And I think with the Spurs and that selection of Kawhi, their shooting coach, I believe Chip England, at the time was the shooting coach, and they really had a lot of faith in the fact that, okay, we see Kawhi has this athleticism, this length, this awareness, and the shot is a question mark, but we have a guy in-house that we feel confident, and we've communicated with him, and he said, okay, Kawhi, I've looked at Kawhi's shot. It doesn't seem broken. I can work with it, and we can make it happen. And that is super important as well. So just recognizing and having that communication in all the different departments is vital to having success with these picks.
What Garrett just said is the first thing I would ensure if I was put into a position of leadership with a NBA's basketball operations team, is making sure there weren't informational silos. Because a lot of times, exactly what Garrett said, like you could have your player development staff watch the film and they could be like, Kawhi's shot's not broken. Like he just has an acute elbow angle. And if we fix that, his shot's not going to fall flat as much. And that's what happened. And it wasn't a problem. Or you have, like I remember talking with a friend of mine who was working with the Phoenix Suns at the time, that at the time of the draft, there was some concerns about Lonzo Ball's ability to get into a deep defensive stance and also his first step. And we were talking about from like a strength and conditioning standpoint, like he probably has tight hips. And if he has tight hips and your strength and conditioning staff tells you that, and like, oh yeah, with a program, I could get those loosened up in like 2 months, all of a sudden, those weaknesses that maybe knocked him down a little bit on your board aren't as big weaknesses, right? But you wouldn't know that if you're not bringing those departments into the actual draft decision making.
No, I agree. I definitely think, and especially when you look at some franchises with like a history, especially in like a 5-year window or a certain regime window of repeated failed attempts to draft picks, no matter where they select. Like there is something about an organizational structure, constant communication, and what is it called? Like not a unified vision, but something like that, where like everyone's working in accord with feedback, so you don't have, like you said, these silos of like information in one camp that's not shared with the other, whatever the case may be. Because if we look at, like I said, the late 2010 like Phoenix Suns, like multiple cracks at high draft picks and missed every time, right? I mean, the only one they got was the very beginning with Devin Booker, right? And that was top 15. but like late in the lottery. So like you're right, like there is something to be said for having that shared goal, and also making sure that when you are scouting, like you're looking at it more holistically and not just, okay, youngest player with the best possible untapped potential if they reach it, or the safest player off the top who brings skills to help a championship team, but you're not a championship team, or whatever the case may be. Like you want to make sure that you're in some level of a shared goal from top bottom.
We've collectively talked about like best player and fit before, and this is why I think you have to go best player for your team, which is not fit and it's not traditional BPA. It's given the context. And again, you have to be very honest, brutally honest with yourself, and you have to be very self-aware as an organization to know this is where we are, this is what we're trying to do. Which player or which option, because maybe trading out of the pick and getting like a veteran player or something else might be a better situation for us, but which option available to us gets us closer to where we're trying to go realistically. Because obviously every team wants to win a championship, but the other thing that comes with the idea of 5 years down the road, in year 5 this player is going to be really good. Guess what? That means you've already had to deal with giving them a very high cost extension, most likely, based on flashes. That's a tough decision to make. And as we get further into this era where like there are more penalties for exceeding the second cap and that sort of thing, those decisions, those big money extension decisions, become very important and very impactful on the rest of your roster building strategies. So if you only think this player is going to be impactful for you maybe at the end of year 4, you then have to make a very big bet on them, most likely to retain them at a much higher number. Like we've heard Patrick Williams, for instance, is searching for an annual number in the 20 million range. Like, how comfortable, if you're Chicago, do you necessarily feel with paying Patrick Williams as he's performed to this point, 20 plus million per year going forward, even if you still think like he hasn't had the perfect situation yet to reach the potential role that we foresaw him when we drafted him. Even if you think that's the case, is it still the case when you're like, we have to, drop a big extension on this guy? So like you have to know who you are, what you're trying to accomplish, and realistically in that case, and then who's the best player or best option available given your context, not just some generic, like if we put this draft class in 2K, this player is going to have the highest rating. That doesn't mean anything because it's about for your team. And that doesn't mean fit. That doesn't mean you do Seattle Supersonics where they drafted like 5 centers in a row in subsequent drafts because each one didn't work out. Because, we need a center, so we'll just take the best center who's still on the board, who's maybe the 40th best prospect. So, like, you have to define beyond position, too. Like, what does our team need based on what we're trying to accomplish and based on the schemes that we know we're trying to run? Who gets us closest to where we're trying to go?
And yeah, again, to repeat what I said earlier, also to add to what you just said, Josh, like, and what are we good at from a development standpoint? Like, you can have two similar talented players, and one guy is lacking a shot and one guy's lacking a handle. Your development staff is really good at developing the shooting. You should probably take that player. And that's where, people always want to know, like, oh, well, what is it? Best player available or fit? And to be honest, it's both all the time. It's a combination. It's not just a simple, there's definitely a gray area with all of this. And yeah, you obviously want to take the guy that you believe can turn out to be the best possible player, but it's context dependent.
Very, very true. Wow, this has been a really good deep dive conversation into this. And before we kind of wrap up, I do want to get like any closing thoughts from just the three of us on this. I definitely think it was interesting, like you said, the nuance of and how close it was to going back into BPA versus fit, right? Like there's an element of that even throughout all of this in terms of why players don't fit. So I think that's very interesting. But Josh, I know you have another point to share, so definitely want to throw it back to you real quick.
Well, I just wanted to build off what Garrett just said, and it works because, like, also the Cavs, which is where Garrett's based. But if you look back at the decision of the Cavs to draft Dion Waiters when they already had Kyrie, this builds into that, like, who's the best player available given our context. And I don't necessarily agree that Dion was the best player available at that point, but regardless, assuming that you believe Dion is the player who has the best ceiling or best potential still available at that point, Dion's success in college was being on ball. Is he going to be on ball when you already have Kyrie? And if Dion is going to be on ball, that means you're reducing Kyrie's potential because now you're putting Kyrie off ball, which admittedly Kyrie can shoot well, but obviously given Kyrie's skill set, you want him more on ball, the ball within his hands. So you're drafting a guy in Dion Waiters who, based on the context of your team, can't reach the potential you see for him. So the question then becomes, is he still the best player available if the most you can get out of him is, say, 67% of his what you project his ceiling to be? Is that still best player available over a player who might complement Kyrie better? That's the question you have to answer.
Exactly, and then it goes to like free agent decisions as well. Like what the situation you're describing makes me immediately think of when Portland in 2016 signed Evan Turner. And it's like you've got Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, who are both better on-ball creators. Evan Turner's best skill is his on-ball creation, but he's worse at it than your two stars. So it was just a terrible fit from the get-go. And yeah, I think that's a great point. I do think like Dion Waiters, I think they did a good job in terms of scouting. Like, oh yeah, he does have NBA level skills, like his burst and his handle. It did translate, and he obviously had some he had some injury issues throughout his career. And also, I don't think he might have had the as good of a work ethic as some other guys, which maybe held him back. But yeah, you're absolutely right that with Kyrie already there, and this is where like even adding Kyrie to Dallas's roster with Luka, it's like, okay, yes, you obviously need more than one creator to succeed. But if you're going to spend $30+ million on a second star next to Luka, wouldn't you want someone that does a lot of the things that Luka doesn't do?
No, I think that's true. And it's funny. I think it's going to be, that leads, I want to put a teaser into like a conversation I think we should have coming up, which is more, I mean, it is the podcast Roster Reconstruction, like maybe less from the draft and more in like how teams are constructed in terms of, okay, we have a certain position we're in, we can kind of figure that out, for our next topic, but whether we have a 10-pole superstar, we're trying to build around them for the next push into becoming a perennial, championship contending team, or we're looking for that final piece, and whether that final piece is for the Nuggets and Aaron Gordon, or like we mentioned for the Blazers, and Evan Turner, and what happens there. Should the Blazers even thought themselves to be in the situation they were in? Like, whatever the case may be, I think that that's an interesting conversation to go into of like how, you evaluate players in terms of how they fit your team. And we did that here on a more draft specific sense. And I thought that was interesting, but I'd like to do that more in other avenues, whether it's trade or free agency moving forward. But this has been a fun one, y'all. Like almost an hour and a half here on this really interesting conversation with some good points and not a lot of Russell Westbrook slander. So I think this is a good place to leave it.
Here it comes.
I know.
All right, Garrett, let's tag team this. So, Russ.
No. And I'll do it. No. And that'll do it here. No, okay. But it will do it here for another episode of Roster Reconstruction. But before we sign off officially, Garrett, Josh, y'all do great work outside of just this specific podcast. So let the good folks know where they can find you or just what work they will be seeing coming from you. Whatever the case.
Yeah, so they can find me on Twitter at Garrett Bugay. I tweet about the NBA when I am actually watching it live, which, isn't as often as you would expect from someone that watches a ton of basketball. But you can also check out my podcast, which both of these guys were just on recently, where we talked about the James Harden trade. That podcast is called Duncan Dynasty. And we'll have an episode maybe here in the next week or two with a first-time guest that I'm excited to have on that worked with me at Sports Info Solutions. So excited for that.
I'm also excited. Thank you, Garrett.
Yeah, I've recently decided to step away from Twitter for a little bit, so I don't really have anything to direct you to at the moment, although my work when I'm not taking care of a 1-year-old is in helping people who want to work within the basketball industry kind of develop systems and approaches that help them get better odds of actually getting their foot in the door and getting that next job that gets them closer to their dream job in basketball. So if you want to get a hold of me, like I said, I'm not really rocking Twitter at the moment, but you can hit me up at josh@myhoopscareer.com. If you're interested, if you want to work in basketball, but you're really not sure how to get started, or you've been, in the space for a while, but had no real success, drop me a line. We can schedule a call and see if I can help you. I also mentor people. So if that's something that is interesting to you, you can reach me that way. And also, seriously, follow Garrett, follow Corban, follow Swish Theory. They're all doing fantastic stuff. And I can tell you that because I am usually a big snob when it comes to basketball analysis. All my friends know that half the time I'm just like, this doesn't say anything. This doesn't mean anything. Tell me why it matters. And these guys in Swish Theory do a really good job of bringing entertaining content that also addresses what does this mean? Which is very the key to good basketball content, in my opinion.
Definitely appreciate the kind words for both of us and everyone else that you kind of follow, Josh. We know from my work with Basketball Intelligence, Josh is indeed a purveyor of basketball literature, basketball intelligence, as it were. You can follow me on Twitter at Corban NBA. I would say also Instagram, not really for any content, just kind of like the followers, but check me out there as well. Find me here working with these fine friends on Roster Reconstruction, Round Ball Ramble. I have a thing with the R's. Definitely make sure to check that out as well. But this has been another fun episode, and our first one here on the Swish Theory feed, so definitely excited for the avenue here and the opportunity and the fun that will ensue from this. But for Garrett, for Josh, for myself, we are Frosty. Y'all stay frosty, and we'll talk to y'all real soon. All right, y'all.